Well, welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Charles Good. Our guest for this episode is Dan Ariely, who is a best-selling author of Predictably Irrational, The Upside of Irrationality, and The Honest Truth About Dishonesty. He is a James B. Duke Professor of Psychology and Behavioral Economics at Duke University and is the founder of the Center for Advanced Hindsight. In this first part of my conversation with him, Dan helps us to understand the nature of our opinions, how they're formed, and how the forces of misinformation can distort them. He highlights that how anyone, given the right circumstances, can find themselves pulled down this funnel of misbelief. In this first part of our conversation, we discuss the first two components of the funnel, the emotional and cognitive elements. We'll explore the heuristics we should use, such as a modified version of Hanlon's razor, and how we all succumb to the illusion of explanatory depth. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we engage with esteemed thought leaders and explore research-backed strategies and techniques that empower leaders at every level to achieve meaningful results that drive lasting change. Thanks for joining me on the program today, Dan.
My pleasure. Lovely to join you.
Love to start out each episode with just our listeners learning more about you. So if you would provide a little bit of background about yourself and what got you interested in this work.
So maybe the best way to describe it is to describe why I have half a beard. Because if people are watching on video, it's a very strange look. And it has a little bit about my history and a little bit about behavioral economics. So here goes. So the original reason for this half a beard is that I was badly burned. And most of my body is covered with scars, including this side of my face, so I just don't have hair growing on this side. But of course, I could shave. And for many years, I indeed shaved. And it looked less strange than it does now. But then a few years ago, almost 10 years ago, I went on a month-long hike. And at the end of this hike, I looked sort of like this. A little bit more hair, a little bit less white, but sort of this strange look. And I looked at myself in the mirror, and I didn't like this look. It's very, very strange. It's strange to look at. I'm sure you agree. It's strange to have on me. And I was determined to, shave this half a beard off. But I thought I'll wait a few weeks and just kind of enjoy it as a memory of this month-long hike. Anyway, the first strange thing that happened was that I got some notes from people on social media thanking me for this half a beard. Why did people thank me for the half a beard? This was not an aesthetic preference, but there were people who told me that they themselves are suffering from some injury, and they felt the need to hide their own injury, and they felt I was just out there saying, look how much I don't care. Now, I didn't correct them, but I thought, if some people are drawing some comfort in this idea that we don't have to hide, that we can show our injury, maybe I'll keep it for a little longer. So I kept it for a little longer. But the real strange thing happened about 4 months down the line. And about 4 months down the line, I started feeling better about my own scars. Now, my facial scars are one thing, but my hand is very strange. I have deformities all over the body. And all of a sudden, I felt less it was my scars versus me. I felt that it's just a story of my life. Some people do tattoos. I have this built-in scars that tell the story of my life. And I thought to myself, why now? What happened that so many years after my injury, now I started feeling better about this? And I started thinking about the process of shaving, because this half a beard was the only new thing that happened. Now think about shaving for somebody like me. Start with smooth on one side, stubble on the other side. Shaving. The act of shaving for me is also the act of hiding. It's the act of reducing asymmetry. The same thing that people thanked me for, I was doing the opposite. I was waking up in the morning and I was doing the things that would make me look less non-symmetrical. I would look more standard, less conspicuous. And I think in retrospect, it was a very unhealthy process. It was a process that got me to actively hide myself every day and delayed, I think, kind of substantially, my acceptance of my own new self and my own injury. Now, here I am, a social scientist. My mother thinks a good social scientist, and I did not predict it. Right? If you ask me, please predict how day number one would look like or feel like with a half a beard, I could tell you. People would point, ask questions, kids would laugh. I can tell you lots of things. But if you ask me, how would the long process of self acceptance feel like? There's nothing about my intuition that I can draw from. And I think this is really the role of behavioral economics and social science, is to basically take those things that we don't have good intuitions about and tell us about them so we can act on them.
Love how you tied that all together. Great insight into your background. Thank you for providing that. Let's move into the topic of misbelief and so much great insights in this book and all the research that you've done and a lot of aha moments. But let's first talk about what you define as misbelief. And in the book, you say it's a distorted lens by which people begin to view the world, reason about the world, and then describe it to others. But it's also a process. And this process you reckon to a funnel of misbelief. So if you could just provide more detail with that, and we're going to go into the various layers or the elements that comprise this funnel, but love for you to give us an overview of what that funnel is and looks like.
Yeah. So to start with, we think that misbelief is about believing in something that ain't so. I believe the world is flat. I believe that there are lizard people, whatever, right? That we believe in something that ain't so. But the reality is that that's not the important thing. The important thing is this idea of a lens from which we view the world. So for example, if you take something and you say, "What's a misbelief that I really don't care if people have?" You might say it's the belief that the Earth is flat. Because if somebody believes that the Earth is flat, it doesn't change the curvature of the Earth. The Earth is going to be the Earth, whether people believe it or not. So you could say, why do I care if people believe that? But the reality is that it's not about the outside; it's about the inside. And if somebody adopts the perspective that the Earth is flat, it means that they think that NASA is lying to them, and the government is lying to them, and every government is lying, and all pilots know the truth and they lie to them, and there's no such things as satellites, and build it up and up and up, and it becomes a lens from which they view the world, and they become suspicious of everything. Because if the government lies to us about this, what about other things? So for me, misbelief is really not about the outside world. That's a shame if people believe things that are not wrong, but when they adopt it as a perspective, a dominant perspective of the world, now it becomes incredibly dangerous. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is that, as you said, it's a process. And here I kind of make the analogy to a cookie. And you can think about the cookie as a weaponized food. The cookie is a combination of sugar, fat, and salt that makes us want one, then another one, and another one, another one, and another one. So the cookie has been designed by somebody to create initial craving and then an ongoing craving. Similarly, what I call the funnel of misbelief attacks much more than our taste. It attacks our emotional system. It attacks our cognitive system. It attacks our personality system. It attacks our social system. If you look at what's out there in the world, it's almost, I don't think anybody like an evil person have created that, but we have created all of these different parts in a way that takes people, standard, lovable, wonderful, intelligent, creative people, and get them to start believing in very strange things. And when we reflect on this, we all have people in our lives that 5 years ago we would say, me and this other person, we see the world in the same way. And now we look at the same people, and we all have people like this in our circles that we say, something is broken in this person. How can it be that we look at the same world out there and we interpret it in such different ways? And part of the important thing about this book for me is that we should not discount those people, and we should not discount their ideas. These are wonderful, caring, intelligent people. We shouldn't say it's them versus us. We should understand that those people were in a state that adopting a misbelief answered some deep psychological needs for them. And the question we need to ask is, what was the state of that person that they needed to adopt this misbelief? And then we need to understand that these are wonderful, caring people, and this process could happen to all of us. And we need to understand what is it that causes this process and then try to prevent it.
Also, one of your goals of the book, which I think is so important to emphasize right now, is to highlight that anyone, given the right circumstances, can find themselves pulled down this funnel of misbelief. It's just not certain people. You have predilections, susceptibilities to it, which we're going to go through by identifying these 4 elements.
That's right. And you know, the thing about this is the moment we understand that we're all susceptible, it creates higher urgency in solving this problem. Because if you say, oh, it's these other people that do this, then you say, oh, we don't need to fix everything. But the moment you understand, I could have been there as well. My kids could go down it as well. And so on. Then you say, okay, let's figure out what are we doing wrong? What are the things that we need to solve? So the first element is stress. And by stress, I don't mean, gee, I'm so busy, I'm not sure how I'll manage to answer all my emails. By stress, I mean I don't understand the world. I don't understand what is happening here. Something is very strange, and I don't know how this is happening. If we think about the world right now, you know, toward the end of February 24, I think the Houthis are, for me, one of those things. Who are they? Where do they come from? Why are they destroying shipping in the US, in the world? What are they after? Who is funding them? How is it happening? It's like a force that came from nowhere. That I say, I just don't understand where they are. Or another way to think about it, I'm Israeli and Jewish. I'm actually in Israel right now. Clearly, terrible war between Israel and Hamas. I don't understand how anti-Semitism against American Jews is happening right now. How are they involved? None of them elected the Israeli government. None of them are connected to this. How are they a target all of a sudden? So if you think about the first layer is this thing that says, I don't understand the world. It could be COVID. It could be financial shocks. By the way, I talk to a lot of undergrads these days. They are stressed over ChatGPT and that technology. They're saying, look, we're just starting our career. What jobs will not be here by the time we graduate, that everything we're doing now is wrong? So the stress we're talking about is the stress that takes the feeling of control away from people. Think about how wonderful it is for undergrad to know, I'll graduate, I'll get a job, I'll get a salary, it will be fine. And how challenging it is to say, I don't understand the world, I don't know where we're going. Now, there's a beautiful study that looks at fishermen. And they look at 2 types of fishermen. There are fishermen who fish in the deep sea, the ocean, and fishermen who fish in the lake. Which one of them has a more predictable fishing output? The lake doesn't change that much. It's the same. Whatever was yesterday is likely to be today and tomorrow. The ocean, very different story. Which type of fisherman is more likely to start believing in superstitions? The ocean. Why? The feeling of control. So we're living in an unprecedented time, I think, between COVID, financial instability, governments, political polarization, the wars. We're living in a time of unparalleled stress. And, you know, because again, we said the stress is about not knowing what is happening. Like if you think about Second World War, we had an idea of who are the good guys and who are the bad guys and what's happening. Now it's much more confusing about this. So, so we have unpredictable stress, and then what do we want to do? We want a story with the villain, and that's what misbeliefs are. There's stress, we don't understand it. Let's find a story with the villain that we can adopt. Now, another important thing to understand is that the usual inoculation against stress is resilience. If you think about what is it that allows us to absorb stress and not to resort to misbelief, it's about resilience. And sadly, we have to recognize that we're kind of at an all-time low of resilience. For one, we have shied away from social relationship into virtual relationships. They're not the same. You don't have the same empathy and depth. You don't have the same feeling that somebody is going to support you. Also, and this is a trend that I see, but tell me if you see something different. I think that these days, even before COVID, people were less likely to talk about personal life at work. There was this belief that work is work and life is life, and you shouldn't talk about life at work. Like if you are worried about your kids or your significant other or your love life and so on, don't bring it to work. But that separation, I think, has also decreased resilience. I think cancel culture has decreased resilience. We're more afraid to bring up ideas or tell jokes or say something. And finally, economic inequality is decreasing resilience. Even at the level of a neighborhood, as the economic inequality increases, people are less likely to go and ask their neighbors for help. So we have tremendous amount of trust and low amount of resilience. Hence, we're looking for to blame somebody else. We're looking for a story with the villain. So that's the first condition. By the way, if people don't have stress, they would not develop misbeliefs. Misbelief is like it's a necessary condition. Without it, we will be fine.
No, absolutely. Just getting back to that resilience piece, because from everything we know about resilience, it works as an insurance policy against stress, helping us to deal with those difficult moments in our lives, and it's based on that psychological construct of secure attachment. And what you mentioned before is that any adult can increase that secure attachment through forming and maintaining deep and trusting relationships, with which I agree with you has not been done even before the pandemic. We are moving toward a culture where this is less and less emphasized and looked at as something desirable that we really need in our lives.
You're absolutely right. So usually, think about life. We go through our lives, and then from time to time, something bad happens. Let's say an injury. You poof go down in terms of quality of life, and then we usually think about resilience: is do you bounce back? How long it takes you to bounce back? Are you bounce back to where you started from, or below, or maybe above it, and so on. But the reality is, resilience is not just about how you react after the fact. It's also how you walk around life before something bad happened. And this is exactly where this concept of secure attachment that you mentioned is so important. That if we walk in life with the feeling that if something bad happens, somebody will catch us, that's like a super power. Now you're saying, I can dare, I can try, I can take risks, somebody would catch me. It'll be incredible. But of course, it's like an insurance policy, but we need to pay the dividend for that insurance policy. And the policy is spending time with friends and so on. But by the way, I think that the workplace used to have a much larger role in creating resilience. I think it has a smaller role now. Of course, after COVID, work from home and so on, it's even worse. But I think by the fact that we're saying don't talk about sensitive things, don't bring politics, don't talk about personal life, and so on, we are actually decreasing.
Absolutely. The other part of it really is around that decision making, which you alluded to. And I love how you mentioned Hanlon's razor, which I think really attributes to misbelief. And that basically states never attribute to malice that which can be adequately explained by stupidity. Now, you have a modified version, which I think is even better, that I'd love for you to unpack for our listeners so they can see how their thinking may really attribute to their level of misbelief or have them go down this funnel.
Yeah. So the real question is, when we see something bad happening around us, what do we think it is? Now, it's kind of interesting. When we see something good happen, we often say, oh, it was just dumb luck. But when something bad happened, it's very hard to think about bad dumb luck. And we often attribute malice to it. Where I think we should just, I don't like the term stupidity, because stupidity assumes that people are incapable. But I think we can add irrationality, lack of thinking. We can add all kinds of things that are not necessarily implying something negative. It's basically being human. It's about being human. So, so when something bad happens, the question is, what do we think? And if we say, look, misbelief is about a perception, that means that when something bad happens, we say, oh, somebody's behind it. It's Bill Gates and the Illuminati. They might be after me. There's a reason for that. Where mostly it's not. Mostly the world is run by lots of bad and good luck. But we covered the stress parts. I want to cover a little bit the cognitive part. The cognitive part is the part where we think. It's like Excel. We take out things, we reason pros and cons, and so on. And there's lots of different parts in the cognitive parts that get us down the wrong path. Some of us choose NBC, some of us choose Fox News. Right? There's choices. Some of us choose TikTok, and TikTok chooses things for us. And there are ways for us to read something and discount the things we don't like and emphasize the things we like. But one of the components in the cognitive part that I like the most is called the illusion of explanatory depth. So, what is the illusion of explanatory depth? I demonstrated it by going to people and say, how much do you understand how a flush toilet works? You know, one of those things that you do this and the water comes out. People say, oh, I really understand how it works. Great. On a scale from 1 to 10, very, very high. Fantastic. And then I say, luckily for you, I have all the pieces of a flush toilet here. Please assemble it. How many people manage to assemble it? Zero. But what I do now is I ask, and now, how much do you think you understand the flush toilet? And people dramatically decrease their perceived understanding of it. Now, think about this. Usually, when we try to convince somebody of something, what do? We fight with them. Here's another thing, and here's another thing. And our success rate is not very high. When I asked people, I said, think about the last 3 years. How many people have you had an argument with, a discussion with? And at the end of this argument, people said, you know what? You're absolutely right. I never thought about this, but now that you explain it so clearly, I'm absolutely convinced. I'm fully buying your argument. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen, and it doesn't happen in the other way as well. Like, how many times have we come to people and say, oh, you're right. You're right. I was just wrong all these years. Like, now, why doesn't it happen? Because we don't listen. I mean, there's an illusion that one person talks and the other person talks, and when one person talks, the other person listens. That's not true. The fact is that when another person is arguing with us and they're saying something that we don't believe in, we're like soldiers. We are already preparing our argument from moment zero. Even before they finish the first sentence, we are already counter arguing. So you say, well, an hour, this person talks for half an hour, this person talks for half an hour, the other person listens. No, this person talked for an hour, and reasoned quietly for an hour about they were right. And this person did the same thing. So at the end of the day, we end up being more convinced than when we started, because we spend the whole hour either expressing our ideas or defending against the other person. Now, the illusion of explanatory depth gives us some hope, because it says there's a big gap between people's certainty and their real knowledge. And we can use that. How do we use it? We go to people and we say, I'm not arguing with you. Help me understand your position. Right? So again, let's assume we take the terrible situation in Gaza, and let's assume that somebody says, I think, I'll describe to discussions that I have very often. People say, I think that there should be an immediate ceasefire. I say, look, I can't grant one, but let's say I could. I would grant you one immediately. Let's agree it will be good to have a ceasefire. And then I say, what's next? I don't argue, right? I say, what's next? You tell me. And they say, I want the Israeli Defense Force to quickly leave Gaza. Fine, you got it. And then I say, what's next? And he said, what do you mean, what's next? I said, this is not the end of the story. I say, do we let Hamas continue to rule Gaza? And let's say they say yes. I say, great. And what next? So what do you mean? I said, do we let them arm again? I said, yes, of course, they are the ruling party. Do you allow them to get nuclear weapons from Iran? They said, no. Do you give them an air force? Do you give them a navy? What happens if October 7th repeats again? In 3 months, what do you recommend now? And I realize that in this approach, I'm not arguing with people. I'm just saying, help me understand what it is. And the reality, of course, is that almost everything in life is very complex, right? In my view, the situation between Israel and Hamas is terrible and wrong, and there's lots of wrong things on all sides. And it's just a difficult, painful, unbelievably complex situation. And my goal is not to convince people A or B. I don't think we could do that. My goal is to get people to realize what a complex situation is. Again, we said, I want to reduce people's confidence from 100% that they know what they're doing to 95 or 90% confidence, right? Because the moment that you understand that you're not 100% sure, that's the place where people would start being open to new ideas. So the illusion of explanatory depth basically suggests that one good way of dealing with this is not attacking people, but it's saying, I buy your perspective, help me understand how it works, help me understand what that would mean. And the moment people started talking like this, we actually recognize much more agreement between us. Yes, it's a difficult situation. Yes, everybody is wrong. Yes, and so on. And those are the right situations to move forward.
I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.